Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. And this is The Big Questions. In a week when US generals talked openly about withdrawal from Iraq and peace activists disrupted an arms fair in London, we ask, should a person of faith ever fight? Well, we've amassed troops from both sides. Former hostage Norman Kember and Christian soldier General Tim Cross. And later I'll be talking to Annie Lennox about her views on war, peace, and also how I was a big fan of hers when I was at university. And blast from the past for Annie there. And leading up to Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, big question number 2, are some sins unforgivable? Well, we'll be hearing from the mother who can't forgive Tracy Andrews for the murder of her son. And have you heard the one about the editor of the Catholic Parish magazine? He lost his job for telling jokes. So we ask, has God got a sense of humour? Well, we are in Oxford with a local audience, our specially invited commentators, and with the help of Sonia Diol. We hope to hear from you too. How do people get in touch, Sonia?
Absolutely, Nikki. Well, this is the centre of it all. I get all your emails, texts and calls and comment coming through. So send us in about this week's debates. You can get involved by calling 0870 366 9960. You can text TBQ ahead of your message and then send all of that through to 63399, or you can send a message via our website.
So that question, should people of faith fight? Norman Kember, peace activist, rescued by the SAS. Isn't that the nub of the problem? There always has to be, for pacifists, somebody else there to protect them.
No, I'm not interested in that question. I want to talk about non-violence, because I'm an evangelist for non-violence. I think that non-violence has solved so many problems, and people aren't interested in those solutions. People know about Gandhi, they know about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is a great Christian hero, but he's never followed. And I think that Christians, through the teaching of Jesus, I think Jesus taught about non-violence. You've got to oppose evil, oppose oppression, but how do you do it? That's the question for me. And I think that Christians are called to find non-violent solutions to conflicts.
Is it ever a situation where a war is justified? Is it ever a situation that you think violence is justified, when your own family is threatened, when your own country is threatened by tyranny?
No, I think that if people followed the route of non-violence, that many of these things would, that these difficult situations would not arise.
Well, that's interesting. Peter Hitchens, is this a tenable position?
I don't think so. Non-violence only works when you're up against governments and authorities which are fundamentally civilized. If you come up against barbaric despots, they'll simply gun you down whether you're violent or non-violent, or throw you into a dungeon. If you look at the successful non-violent activists of the 20th century, they all were up against law-governed, civilized, democratic states. If they'd been up against Hitler or Stalin, you probably never have heard of them.
You call the Marcos regime a civilized and democratic government, do you? You must know the story of the wives of Jewish husbands who got their husbands released from prison in Rosenstrasse in Hitler's Germany.
Well, they did do that, but I think that is notable as being exceptional in general.
Oh, come on!
In general, any resistance to Hitler in Germany was met with the most ruthless, violent response and was crushed.
Let's another pacifist here, Sarah Lazenby. A quick question to you and a quick answer, if you would. What would Jesus have done about Hitler?
Well, Jesus wouldn't have got us to 1939 without doing something earlier, because Jesus tells us to love our neighbours as ourselves, and that's everyone all over the globe.
Would Hitler have listened to Jesus earlier?
You wouldn't even start with Hitler getting into power necessarily. You would have ways of managing conflict, and we do have them today. They do exist. Conflict prevention techniques are in existence now. We know how to do them. We don't have the will to spend the money at the time when it's needed.
That's a fascinating position. I saw you reacting to it. Jesus would not have let Hitler get into power, Rabbi Julia Neuberger.
I just don't think life is like that, and I also think that human beings often elect people or come to support people because they are charismatic, but they are also people who want to do evil. And I think you have to be prepared in some circumstances to get in there and beat them down. And if that means, because they're threatening your life, I think that's legitimate. And certainly in Jewish teaching, if somebody is threatening your life, then you have the right to attack them. And can I just say that it wasn't Jesus who said originally you should love your neighbour as yourself. It comes from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. It comes from the book of Leviticus. And it's shared between Jews, Christians and Muslims, and in fact most other faiths.
Whoever said it. General Tim Cross, isn't it, getting back to Jesus, getting back to the Bible, thou shalt not kill. That's pretty clear, isn't it? You're a top military man. How did you reconcile that?
Well, I became a Christian when I was 30. I was in Jerusalem, in the Garden Tomb, on Easter Sunday, which happened to be my 30th birthday, and one of the first issues I had to grapple with was, could I remain in the military? Because I'd been involved in the military at that stage for quite a long time. The answer for that, for me personally, and I think this is, I respect other people's opinions, but for me personally, in exploring the Old Testament and the New, the reality of Jesus praising the centurion's faith, saying, I've never found faith anywhere like this in Israel, the way that John the Baptist said to soldiers, be content with your pay, he didn't say leave the military, and the fact that those of us in this room who are Christians today, the faith came to the Gentile world through a centurion, a man called Cornelius that Peter went to see. So I think for me the Bible affirmed that I could continue to be a soldier.
But what does thou shalt not kill, General? What does it mean?
Well, how
then?
I soldiered and how I used my faith within my profession clearly is an issue. I don't think it does say thou shalt not kill. It says thou shalt not murder. It has to be done within a system of judiciary and justice and righteousness. And my experiences in defending justice and righteousness affirm that for me.
Scott, I'm going to speak to you in a minute, but I want you to come in here because I can see you reacting to what the General's saying.
Sure. During the first 170 years of Christianity, Christians were not allowed to be in the military. If you had been transported back to that period when Jesus actually walked, or the first 170 years of the Christian tradition, you would not have even been admitted into the church. You would not have been allowed to receive the Eucharist. That's a sad thing to say for me to say to you on a personal level, but the early Christians were pacifists. They would not take up the sword. All the early Christian writers talk about this. People like Tertullian say that when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed every Christian. Now, you might turn to Scripture and look at people like the centurion or John the Baptist, but these people in the early church, they were told very, very specifically that they could not kill. But people like St. Patrick said, killing cannot be with Christ.
The geopolitical situation, Joanna, doesn't that make things rather more complex now?
I think it's definitely, we're in a very complex situation now, and I think going back to the principles of just war, everybody feels very uneasy about the war in Iraq. But looking back at Second World War, I think Bonhoeffer is a very interesting person to look at. He was a pastor in Germany, and he joined the resistance, and he said that in a guilty world we have to get our hands dirty and accept a measure of guilt, and he actually had to sign death warrants for people in order to save a larger number of people, and then he himself was caught up in the plot to kill Hitler and was executed.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, Peter, in 1 second, because you mentioned Bonhoeffer and you mentioned you have to get your hands dirty. And Dick, you were in Northern Ireland, a Christian, and you were in charge of a lot of men in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And indeed, people died as a result of your men's actions.
Yes.
How much does that weigh on your conscience?
Well, I became a Christian in the army, rather like General Tim here, and I thank God that there were Christians around in the army to help me to become a Christian. But for me, there are two things that help for Christians in the army. One is to do with how you do your job better to save lives, ultimately, and the second one is to do with the treatment of prisoners. And we've had a lot of problems in Iraq on that score. And when I was a platoon commander, we were going into a Republican area just after Bloody Sunday, and I'd had a patrol. We weren't taught how to patrol properly, and we got ambushed, and a soldier shot in the back, and a man was killed looking on in a gunfight. And later I had to take a patrol out, and I realised immediately that this wasn't going to work. So I stopped the patrol, and I had a bit of a crisis within my own life because I thought I'd failed as an officer, and that's quite a deep thing to happen. But at that time I prayed for the first time that I should have some help from God, this God who I knew was there somewhere but didn't really know him very well. And the next day I had a conviction, really, that I should not patrol again until I worked out how to do it properly. And we did work out what was now been accepted by the whole British Army, which is multiple four-man patrolling. We actually worked it out then. And that was, to my mind, God, I attribute that to God helping me to do my job better and save lives, ultimately to save lives in that
I was in the
situation.
military as well. I was a crew chief on F-111 fighter bombers at Lakenheath from 1980 to 1983. And I became a Christian there through the Navigators, an evangelical organization. You're probably aware of them. But when I read Scripture, and believe me, at that time we had the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, that if we had our nuclear weapons aimed at the Russians and they had theirs aimed at us, it was kind of a Mexican standoff. Nobody would pull the trigger. And I believed in that doctrine. I grew up with that doctrine. Everyone in my family was in the military, going back for many, many years, fought in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and so on. So I naturally went that route. But when I read a new doctrine, which was love your enemies, I could no longer believe the doctrine that the state had taught me.
So has Dick Beath got it wrong?
Yes, he did have it wrong. I'm sorry to say that.
I think that to say that you have it wrong, I mean, you either have to say that the military is evil, you shouldn't be part of it. But if military is necessary, just like the police are necessary, are the police evil? Because police carry guns, police have to keep order. And in the army, you are simply keeping order. Now, if you go beyond that point, then I think you're into an unjust war. But I don't think you can say that the army is evil, and if it's not evil, then you need Christians in the army.
I didn't say the army is evil. I didn't say the army is evil.
Well, what's the army for, then?
There should be no armies. There should be no armies. All people should take and lay down their weapons.
Peter Hitchens.
The effect of the ideas which you propagate is the most important thing. The effect of pacifism in the 1930s in Europe was to lead inevitably to violent war and to huge numbers of deaths and enormous amounts of destruction. Pacifist ideas infecting politics and persuading people that the way to avoid war is to disarm, to dismantle armies, to make sure that there are no people like Tim to defend you, means that you get attacked. You yourself supported...
If the Nazis had believed the teachings of Rabbi Akiva and Jesus and the Buddha, if the Nazis had believed that, there would have been no World War II.
Had they done so, but they didn't.
But when the politicians are always trying to teach them to disobey the fundamental teachings of the 5 great religions, the politicians are always teaching them that.
I'm sorry, I can understand people being pacifist and I admire them for it. But I think you need to understand that it is absurd to say that people who became Nazis or fascists or communists who then became sort of Stalinists and wiped out huge numbers of people, that in some ways, if they'd just stopped and listened, it would all have been all right.
No, they should have been taught in an early age. But government prevents that. The government prevents that, even at very basic levels, by making everyone wear the same uniform.
Okay.
By going into schools and recruiting young people.
Okay, interesting thoughts. Reverend G, again, you were in Northern Ireland. You were, I guess, in one sense, a man of war. You're also, as we can quite conspicuously see, a man of God. Can you be both?
Well, I mean, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I know, but I think it was Martin Luther King who said real evil is when good men stand by and do nothing. And for me, that says it all.
Exactly.
All right, well, we're getting a reaction to this from people watching at home. Sonia, what are people saying?
Well, quite mixed reaction. Like this from Beth in Belfast, for example. She says followers of all religions should follow non-violence. Undoubtedly, she says religion is a catalyst for a lot of the wars we've seen. Opposing that is Shep, who says Christians specifically can be soldiers and fight. He says it's completely legitimate war authorised by a lawful government. So very mixed reaction coming this end.
And you wanted to say something. You get the microphone over to this gentleman here. Yes, what's your point?
Yes, the name of Gandhi has come up, obviously, as probably the foremost protagonist of non-violence in the 20th century. Is it not significant that he himself actively recruited in India in support of the British Army at the beginning of the Second World War?
So it's impossible to separate, even in the situation, from what's going on politically. from what's going militarily. He had a position, if you like, and indeed supported Indian nuclear tests, didn't he? Yes, at the back. What would you like to contribute?
Yes, I think that what our friends over there are saying is wonderful if everybody felt like that. But I think there are so many evil situations in the world. For example, what's happening in Darfur with the Janjaweed. Somebody has to step in and take military action in those situations. And I would rather that it were soldiers who are also people of faith than soldiers who are not people of faith. So actually I would promote having Christians and other people of faith, that like the people we've heard from today, in forces, especially to step in where evil is already being committed.
Rwanda, of course, being another situation where, Norman Kember, surely if there's a situation where there should have been military intervention, Rwanda.
Well, the saddest thing about Rwanda was that Rwanda was practically entirely a Christian country. Somebody had not taught the young Rwandans that the killing people is not, you cannot love your enemies and kill them. And
so
to me, it's a very simple Christian teaching.
If they had been taught that, and if it had been a Christian country, the Rwandan genocide would not have happened.
I believe that if young Christians were taught that if you love your enemies, you can't bomb them and you can't kill them, and I think if that had been taught, I think the church has ignored this teaching. And I think that if it had been foremost in the church's teaching, we'd have had a different result.
General Cross.
Well, I want to go back to 2 points, if I may. One is, I don't think that you can talk about the early years of the church and dismiss Scripture. The Scriptures that I'm using are fundamental to where I come from in this. And I just do not accept that the Lord would have used soldiers, centurions, and people like that if this was fundamentally the wrong thing to be doing. And secondly, whilst that said, this may sound a bit condescending, but I genuinely understand your views, and I'm delighted that we have people who propagate these views. We need that sort of pressure constantly. But we live in a fallen world. As people of faith, one of the fundamental issues here is we live in a fallen world, and there are people out there who will destroy, kill others if we are not prepared to stand by.
I'm interested as well, Tim, in the point just made by Norman Kember, if anyone wants to pick that up, but that if Rwanda had been a Christian country with proper Christian teaching, that would never have happened. I mean, some people at home would, I'm sure, want to respond to that as well. What would you like to respond to that point?
Yes, I think there's a problem here with human nature, because it's a bit naive, and I think just to think that everybody could be taught as a Christian and believe that. I was raised as a Mennonite in the Midwest of America, and I was raised as a pacifist. But as I've grown up, I've come to look back on that as a bit naive and innocent. I think there are situations where people are violent, and you have to do something to stop it. If you look at examples when someone's mentioned the police as well, it's not just war. Like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, you have all these nice, civilized Christian people, and all of a sudden, when they realize no one's watching and what they can get away with, they're looting their neighbors' homes. And there is something, we do live in a fallen world. There is a bad side to human nature, and sometimes you have to stop it.
But what about the individual conscience, Julia Neuberger, of a soldier who does not believe in the cause? We see it in Israel with refuseniks in the army. We see it in Iraq now. What should a soldier do as he sees it? His duty to his country or his duty to his or her God?
Well, I think this is more complicated even than the duty to God. But I mean, I think let's just tease that out a little bit. If you are somebody who is serving in the military and you desperately disapprove and disagree with the cause. I think Iraq is a good example, because I think we went into Iraq for the wrong reasons. I do not think Iraq has been a just war, and I think we're causing more damage by being there than by not being there, and that's eventually the Americans are saying that. I think there have to be some people in the military, and I know this is very hard. I think there have to be people in the military who stand up and say, we can't do this. We can't carry on. And that's very difficult within the setup of military organisation. So it's not only about your duty to God, as your duty to God, your conscience, is to say, I'm not prepared to do this. But there's also your duty to your fellow soldiers and your duty not so much to your country as to the way the command works in the army. And I think that's complex.
Was it a just war, Iraq?
Well, I'll come back to that if you want to, but let's just focus on the issue first. Absolutely right. My commander-in-chief ultimately is the Lord God, not the government of this nation. And if I felt that I needed to make a decision to leave, I would leave. We live in a democratic country where the members of our armed forces are volunteers, and many of them, not thousands and the rest of it, but I've certainly known people who've said, Northern Ireland days, I don't think this is right, I'm leaving. And I absolutely respect their judgment.
What if we feel, if I may, what if we feel, as some people do, that we have been lied to?
Well, that's a slightly different issue. I mean, coming to the conclusion that what we're doing is wrong, I need to make a decision. My decision is either to stay or go, and so on. In terms of Iraq, just war, and all the rest of it, then we are again a democratically elected nation. We have a government. It passes us information. It makes decisions. Many military people constantly are involved in briefing and explaining and trying to give the government of the day a sense of what's going on. The last people who want to go to war actually are those in uniform, because they're the guys who live with the consequences and girls who live with the consequences of the decision. So we do work for governments who make decisions, who authorize the use of force under the umbrella of our democracy. And yes, occasionally we can look back and say they got it wrong.
The problem here is surely with government and with Parliament. It seemed to me that it was obvious to a baked potato that we were being lied about Iraq from the very beginning. Our members of Parliament wholly failed to see this, wholly failed to act, and therefore dispatched soldiers to a war that they oughtn't to have been sent to. It's their responsibility. They're the ones who should be having the tortured consciences now.
Roger, if I may, very quickly.
Let's just say, this nation re-elected this government and the US government who lied to the nation. So that's the downside of democracy.
And so they were not wholly, utterly unsympathetic, one has to say.
Correct.
And that's a problem.
But there are other issues in an election, and that is also the problem. Roger lost his son. You lost your son in a roadside bomb in Iraq. When you hear politicians debating Iraq, when you hear people in the studio like this debating Iraq, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that he shouldn't have gone. It made me very angry when he was killed, and made Maureen very angry, sitting behind me. And we focused our anger on Bush and Blair. And I'd already decided before we went to war in Iraq that it was going to be the wrong thing to do. He'd been in the army since 1988. He went into the first Iraq War. And we were all right with that. A territory had been invaded. They'd asked for our help. We went to assist them.
A clearer position.
He then went to Bosnia, which is a peacekeeper, in the middle of that. Okay? The situation had arisen. He went there to help out. Then he went to Afghanistan. This was a bit more difficult. And then he went to Iraq, and that was wholly wrong. I mean, my belief is that sometimes you have to go to war, but it is absolutely the last resort.
Roger, thank you very much indeed. What about people's reactions at home, Sonia?
Yeah, very mixed reaction coming in this end, Nikki. Looking at just what the panellists have been saying this morning, Paul says, while having great respect for Norman Kember, Peter Hitchens is absolutely correct. If we adopt a completely non-violent approach in this world, then it will be ruled by terrorists. Surely this is the only logical conclusion. But then there's been quite a few emails and texts and calls coming in saying things like this. This is from Mark, who says, war unfortunately comes out of religion and politics. Linda from Sussex says, you're not just hurting the people you want to hurt, you're hurting innocent people as well. So it's been really good to get that. Keep your comments coming through. The numbers are rolling on your screen right now. 2 more debates coming up. One, are some sins unforgivable? If there's something perhaps that's happened to you that you found hard to forgive, tell us your story. And also, does God have a sense of humour?
First, Annie Lennox, former Eurythmics star, campaigner on AIDS, on poverty and also on peace. She talked to me about the thinking behind her new album, Songs of Mass Destruction, and I asked her about the big peace concert next Saturday. I'm interested in peace one day, on September the 21st.
21st?
Yeah. Can we ever have peace?
Well, it's like, will poverty ever be made history? It's not about the end result so much as the effort put in, the energy and the focus put in to work towards it. We may never have that result, most unlikely. Doesn't matter. Rather get involved with the issue on a daily basis and make that your life's function and your focus than being cynical, walking away from it and kind of going, pfft.
I'm just interested as well in the whole idea of peace. I mean, is there ever a just war?
I feel, yeah, I'll ask that question. That's a really good question. Yes, there probably is. To protect the innocent, yes. Do you lie down and not defend yourself? Are you just invaded...
Do you let some genocidal
Exactly.
dictator or cabal of criminal maniacs do as they will?
You don't. Peace is not only about the issue of warfare. It is also about an attitude in life towards oneself and others, I would say, And I struggle with it. I'm not evolved. I'm not that evolved. I'm certainly not enlightened, and I'm certainly flawed as a human being, beyond any doubt, measure of doubt. That's what makes me the human being that I am.
We all are.
Yeah, we all struggle. We struggle. But I'd rather go on this side than that. I'd rather not self-destruct, and I'd rather try to go for the positive as opposed to, the destructive.
Very melancholy. I mean, dark road. Are we all on a dark road?
Yes, potentially, we actually are, because the thing is, the human condition means this: you did not ask to be born. And seeing as you have been, you're in the human race, which means the one thing for sure that's going to happen to you is at the end of the day, you're going to die, and you don't know what the circumstance is going to be.
As I get older, I think more and more about that stuff, about existence, about who we are, what we are, why we're here, and it infuses this album. The very title of this record, it's a provocative title.
Definitely.
Songs of Mass Destruction. Is it about the troubles of the world, or is it about your own troubles?
I think that it's about the times we live in, externally and internally. Whatever troubles I have, I share them with others. They are common to all. Life comes in, circumstances come in, and it's how we respond to those circumstances. Do you jump off the bridge, or do you carry on stoically? And during that period of stoicism, try to figure it out.
Sing, my sister, sing. Let your voice be heard. What won't kill you will make you strong. Sing, my sister, sing.
You've become very involved with Nelson Mandela in the fight against AIDS and HIV, right?
He stood in front of his former prison cell in the exercise yard of Robben Island, addressing the world's press. And he said, "We have fought the battle against apartheid. We've won that struggle. But we have a momentous war going on in our country and across the whole of Africa, which is the battle against the invisible disease of HIV/AIDS.
In that case, then, how disappointed are you that the current president, Thabo Mbeki, is in a kind of state of denial about AIDS?
I am baffled beyond belief, stunned, and every time I go to South Africa, I always have these little chats with people. I sort of take them to one side and say, what's the deal with Mbeki? Why is he taking this denialist stance? What is going on with this man? And his health minister, who says that, no, you don't need medical treatment, ARVs are very toxic.
Herbs.
Take beetroot, take nutritional, if you can get good nutrition. If you're seriously ill and you get good nutrition, it will certainly help on your recovery. I don't know of one person it's been proven that nutrition alone, good nutrition alone has, saved you when your CD4 count is as low as 4. No, you will be on death's door and you will die if you do not get intervention, medical intervention. We would rather have prevention rather than treatment. But unfortunately, when you have a society which is riddled with lack of education, criminality, things that come out of chronic poverty. Yeah. Women are the first victims, so you have a high instance of rape. I'm not condoning masculine violence or domestic violence, but when a man has not been given proper education, who has not been given opportunities, that person is going to be very, very angry, and what he's going to do is take it out on the easiest victim, the one next to him, his wife, his girlfriend, his children. That's what's going to happen.
So
it's symptomatic.
If I was in those circumstances, I could very well be that man there, but for the grace of God. Do you believe that, of any of us, yeah?
Yeah.
That's a powerful thought. This is where the Vatican comes in then, when we're talking about prevention.
Hello.
Hello?
Just, mad world. Don't use condoms. Give me a break.
They would say,
They're like ostriches with their head in the sand.
They would say, have some morality.
We're dealing with reality here. Let's be realistic. Your morality is fine when people can respond to it. They can't respond to it. I mean, when people don't get proper education, proper food on the table, in the first place, proper housing, proper sanitation, you expect them to respond morally? No, you have a chronic problem. I have just come back from South Africa, and I was on a film mission, and we were filming different circumstances in hospitals, clinics.
This is Avi Lili. She's 7 years old, but she weighs the same as a 1-year-old baby. She has pneumonia, and she has full-blown AIDS. If her mother had been given access to antiretroviral treatment, Avi Lili probably wouldn't be HIV positive.
Once you see that child, you can't turn away from it. She's one of millions, but it personalises, it makes it real for you, you know?
And your children, your daughters, do you speak to them about it? Are they as aware as any teenagers are of the global issues that you're focused on?
Yeah, they're very aware. I mean, I see that my kids are, for their ages, very human, kind, warm, empathetic, lovely individuals, and that's good enough for me. Maybe further down the line, they'll get more proactive. It's not for me to say, you have to be like this. No, definitely not. I will not dictate their future.
Well, I'm glad that you got into music, because I really enjoyed the tourists at Aberdeen University Union. When I was at Aberdeen University, it was a great night. It's a long time ago. But listen, great talking to you.
Oh, lovely to talk to you too. My God, I'm just still like flashback mode.
It wasn't that long ago, just 1980 or something. Annie Lennox there. Now, if you're Jewish, you will be celebrating your New Year, Rosh Hashanah, which culminates in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, next Saturday. Do we have a rabbi in the house? Yes, we do. Rabbi Julia Neuberger. What's it all about?
It's an extraordinary thing that the Jews do. The New Year isn't a great happy event. We've just had New Year on Wednesday night, Thursday and Friday. And it's the beginning of these 10 days of repentance. And you use the 10 days culminating in the Day of Atonement on Saturday, so we won't be at the concert. We use those 10 days to, if you like, ask forgiveness of people that we have wronged during the past year. In fact, people start before the beginning of the 10 days, because you might have quite a lot of people to say sorry to, and to try and get some kind of reconciliation with. And then the 25 hours from Friday night to Saturday night, we fast, we stay in synagogue all evening and then all the next day, praying and asking God to forgive us for the wrongs that we have done God, and to help us to make our peace with other human beings.
Well, this brings us to our second question. Are some sins unforgivable? For you, a particular sin will never be forgiven, will it, Maureen?
No.
Tracy Andrews murdered your son. She stabbed him 40 times.
42 times she stabbed him, and I'll never forgive her, ever.
She initially claimed that it had been a road rage attack by a fat man with bulging eyes. It emerged that she was the killer. Tell us about the press conference shortly after the murder.
She held my hand, she lied to the world, she lied to my family and to me, and she said it was a road rage. By the end of the week, they found evidence that it was her, and they arrested her for the murder of my son.
If she acknowledged, because she did appeal and still, I think, claims that she didn't do it, but if she ever were to acknowledge that she killed Lee, and she were to ask for your forgiveness...
She'd never get my forgiveness.
Never?
And I won't forgive. If I get to heaven, and it's a case of I get to the gate, and they say, you've got to forgive Tracy Andrews, or she can't come in, then I won't go in. I'll go wherever I've got to go. But I won't forgive Tracy Andrews for what she's done. She's took my son, his life, and she's ruined our lives.
And your daughter Michelle said that she hopes that Tracy Andrews, quote, rots in hell. You stand by that?
Yes, I do. I hope she rots in hell too. And that's where she deserves to go. I believe in God, but my faith has been shaken because of things that have happened in my life.
What about that, Reverend Joanna Jepson? Never mind that. What about a man as well, you know, who rapes a child? What about the Yorkshire Ripper? A heinous crime like the murder of Lee? What about a doctor who kills more than 200 of his patients? Aren't some sins unforgivable?
I think what we need to look at here is the centre of the Christian story. It's a story of grace. Human beings can't earn their forgiveness. They can't earn their way out of the things that they've done wrong. And we'll never, none of us will be good enough, ever. We'll never be perfect in our own strength. And so that's where we see a God, the perfect God, coming and taking the weight of this terrible crime and
Should
this
Maureen
sin
forgive?
and all the sin of the world upon him, so that there is the possibility of forgiveness.
What would you say to Maureen about what we've heard from her?
Well, I mean, my heart just goes out to you so much as you speak. It's just horrendous. And I haven't experienced that, and no one really knows what's in the balancing scales of anyone's life and what it takes for them to forgive. I think that the kind of theoretical answer is yes, every sin is forgivable, but what it takes for somebody to be able to do that, I don't think we can do it in our own strength. And as a Christian, you know, with the situations where I've had to forgive really serious injustice in my own life, and it's taken a long time, and it's been a real process, but I have to keep going back to that place, that story of grace, and that nothing is outside God's ability to forgive and put right, no matter how hard that is for us.
Well,
and we're called, I think the other thing is that we're called to forgive, and that's important for us as well, that we don't hold on to it's really annoying, because you know, something dreadful, the most heinous crime has been committed to you in your family, and then you're left with the anger, the rage, the bitterness, and all of that. So it's like you've been
Mark forgave. You forgave. Khayyam was a promising Queen's Park Rangers footballer. Everybody who knew him loved him. He was stabbed. We remember that case, I'm sure. We remember his face, I'm sure. But you've forgiven the killer. How on earth have you managed to find that in your heart?
Well, I can only speak from my own personal experience. My relationship with God, for me, I see it's really real. And I put him first, and I saw God. He gave me my children. He gave me Khayyam. And we're all God's children. So I believe that I went through a process as the court hearing was going through, and we went through about 3 or 4 court cases. It went on for a year. And throughout this process, in the first 2, I felt I was killing myself. I felt like I was just eating away and dying inside, because I was struggling. I wanted to kill this guy. He was that close to me, you know, passing me in court, you know, and I envisioned just holding him quickly, snapping his neck, and just doing my bit, where I felt I needed to do something to get some justice. And after the second case fell through, because I said something to a juror at the station. I asked them, do they realise what they're doing to my family? Because I just felt like they was really incompetent.
Forgive me but you say you've forgiven him. What does that mean? And what could you... For
me, forgiveness is a medicine.
It's made you...
It's made me. It's allowed me to move forward. I couldn't move forward.
Has it empowered you?
It has strengthened me to be able to actually see now. I can see my purpose. I can go forward. I can love. I can have peace again. I can be able to share my experiences with others, where before that was very difficult for me to do, because I had so much anger inside me and I wanted to vent that anger.
Peter Hitchens, could you forgive?
No, I don't think it's our job to forgive on behalf of other people. If someone has been killed, I can't, I'm afraid, it's beyond my powers to forgive his killer. The only person who can forgive him is the person who is dead and who is no longer there to do it. And I just don't see how. And
it's empowering for Mark.
Well, I mean, I think if he wants to forgive the terrible affront and damage done to him, he can do that, and I admire him for doing so, but I'm afraid what he can't do is forgive the crime, because it's not within his power to do so.
This is not about forgiving the crime. This is, people don't understand what forgiveness is about. It's not about the other person. People have got forgiveness like, oh, you know, you've done something really bad, you know, I'm not going to forgive you, I'm letting you off. That's not what forgiveness is about. It's about you. It's a healing for yourself. You release yourself.
The killer knows you've forgiven him.
Well, whatever he knows, does he? I haven't got a clue. This is my walk. This is my personal walk. This is about me, and I understand what forgiveness is about and why God has placed it on earth for us. It's about us. It's not about letting the other person off.
Quick comment from Julia Neuberger.
I think Peter's absolutely right that you can't, in that sense, completely forgive the person, and you've said it's about you, it's not about the other person. You can't forgive the person who's taken your son's life, because the only person who can forgive is the person who's been killed. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that's often said is the Jews should forgive the Germans for what happened in the Holocaust. Well, the problem about that is the only people who can forgive are the people who are dead, so they can't. That doesn't mean that there can't be reconciliation. And I think some of what you're talking about in terms of forgiveness is something about a reconciliation in yourself. And I think that that is important. And the only other being that can forgive is God.
Forgiveness, is it?
Plain straight forgiveness. You can't mess around with it. It impacts lots of people around.
But isn't it
From your
hurt?
hurt,
Peter Hitchens, and then I want to speak to Julie as well, who lost her daughter Jenny.
One very brief thing. I don't think forgiveness is remotely possible where there is no repentance and no atonement by the person who's done the thing.
But even when somebody does repent, we hear, look at Myra Hindley. She said she became deeply religious. She asked for forgiveness, and yet still she was full of... Maureen?
They do it to save their own skins. Tracy Andrews lied to me as she held my hand at the press conference. She lied to my family. She lied to the cameras. She lied to the world. And then, after being in prison for 2 years and given a sentence, what they call a life sentence, and she got only 14 years, she was in there for 2 years, and the other inmates said, you've got to say that you've done it, or you ain't going to get out, because you don't come up for parole. And they do it to save their own skin.
Well, Jenny, the people who killed Jenny, Julie, the people who killed Jenny, they, of course, well, it was a plan, wasn't it? But it was one person, and he blew himself to pieces, didn't he? He thought he was going to paradise as a result. What are your feelings for the brainwashed young man who killed your beloved daughter, Jenny?
Oh, well, I don't know where to start, really. I mean, if I can just say what Peter and Julia have just said, I've been saying for 2 years, you know, forgiveness is very complex, and the person who can forgive is the person who has died, and no one else, I think.
And your daughter died on the 7th of July.
Yes. People talk about forgiveness. I think what they're talking about is healing, and something that is part of a process of forgiveness, maybe, but not forgiveness itself. The people who brainwashed Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, well, I don't know who these people are, but I do know that as individuals we all have to take responsibility for what we do and for our actions. So, although Mohammed Siddiqui Khan pointed in the now infamous video his finger at the government, at Mr. Blair in particular, and because of the war this is what I'm... Well, I just think that's a lot of nonsense. I think that's a very angry, petulant, if I may say, man who chooses this way to express his anger.
And you stood down as a vicar, I mean...
No, well, I stood down as a parish priest.
Yeah.
I didn't lose my faith, and I haven't stepped down in ministry, from ministry, or as a priest.
If something of this enormity had happened to somebody else when you had been a parish priest, would you have counselled that they forgave?
No, never.
So you haven't changed your position?
And I had been in a similar position many years ago, where I think we have to be very careful that, with all respect to Joanna, who I was at theological college with for a while, I think we have to be very careful that what we end up talking about is not perceived as cheap grace by someone. And I think there isn't any individual, whatever their faith or their authority, should be able to say to another human being, let alone a mother, you should forgive in any way.
Imam Hussain, Imam of Eton College, what about Mohammed Siddiqui Khan? What about Osama bin Laden. Is there possible redemption and forgiveness in your religion for him and for also Siddiqui Khan?
I think it's a tragic event, really. It's 7th of July and any other event that's taken place. And we've spoken about war and so on. And I think the example that we have from the Prophet, here's the paradigm example, to heal this wound of war, as it were. Well, the example we have from the Prophet is one of forgiveness. He forgave all the people who'd tortured Muslims, killed Muslims. They had to leave their homes. They returned back to Mecca. And when he was in a position of power, he said, "What would you have done to me?" And they said, "Well, of course, we would have killed you." But he said, "No, this is not what I will do. I will forgive you."
If people followed that precept, there would be no terrorism. That July the 7th would not have happened.
Let me just continue. Now, in terms of forgiveness, in Islam is very clear. It's up to the individual to forgive. But it's meritorious to forgive. So when we take the example of the Prophet, he forgave. So therefore, for us to have some kind of reconciliation, forgiveness is important. But ultimately, if you feel it's impossible to forgive, then I don't think people need to be forced. I mean, ultimately, forgiveness, the door of forgiveness, and it's again coming to God with a sincere heart. How do we know when someone's heart is sincere?
Well, on a completely different level, if I can come to Chris and Doug, you found out that Doug had, we're talking about another sin altogether, we're talking about marital fidelity now. You found out that Doug was a serial adulterer, had been unfaithful to you for 25 years, including an affair with your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
How on earth, why on earth did you forgive Doug?
I think through all the learnings that I'd gone on, I'd been on a personal development for the last sort of 10 years or so. As a child, I'd been through sort of sexual, physical and emotional abuse. And it wasn't until I probably got into my 30s that I needed to, I could see the impacts it was having in areas of my life, in relationships, whatever. And when Doug told me, I really, just before that, I thought I'd been on a course, I'd done a relationship coaching course, and I thought, I've really cracked it, I know where I'm going, and I finally have found me. Then he told me all this, and it was like, okay.
You must have thought it was over.
Yeah, well, I didn't my immediate reaction wasn't, well, that's it, you're out. Go away sort of thing.
How do you know he won't do it again?
I just know. I have complete trust. Although I had trust, I probably didn't trust anyone like I trusted him. So, yes, it could have completely shook my faith in, but I do now, and it's very hard, I know, for some people who wouldn't even accept what he's done.
Has he said sorry?
No. And from our learnings, he doesn't have to say sorry to me. But the forgiveness was not really about forgiving Doug. It was about me letting go myself and forgiving all my because whatever we do, there is we do have a contribution.
Have you forgiven your best friend?
Yes. I haven't spoken to her, but yes, I have forgiven her.
I see, right. There's a slight qualification there, I think.
I actually emailed her when I first knew. And I don't feel now that I have to actually physically speak to her. In my heart, I still love her. I miss her dreadfully.
But you feel that you don't need contact?
I don't need
Doug,
to have the contact.
Yeah. Are you sorry?
What I've learnt is that every action is for a reason. Okay. And so, sorry in our life is a banned word. Chris and I don't do sorry. What we learnt is that, as opposed to saying sorry, it's very easy to say sorry. It's meaningless. It's a meaningless word. What we've learnt is that if a situation happens, you say, this is what I've done and this is what I've learnt from it. Because if you do that, that is so much more meaningful. Because by me explaining to Chris what I've learnt from it, she knows what I have learnt. It's much more empowering.
Will you do it again?
Would I do it again? Absolutely not. No, I mean, we've gone through what we've gone through.
Yeah, together.
Together. And, you know, what we've learned, because what we've established, it all came down to communication, and we've learnt to communicate together better now, totally. And now we're communicating.
It's made you stronger.
It's totally changed.
You see, I think there's something else that you're missing. I think you've hurt her. And I don't think sorry has to be a meaningless word. People can make it meaningless. But if you say sorry and you mean it because you've hurt her, then that seems to me one step on the way to her being able to forgive you. And that seems to me to be quite important. And as we as Jews come up to the Day of Atonement, I would say to you that that's the kind of relationship, the returning, the coming together that we would expect that makes forgiveness possible.
You've made you've kind of made an assumption there that Chris hasn't forgiven me.
She may well have done, but you haven't acknowledged the hurt you've done her. Oh, he has.
I have. But I've acknowledged it in a different way. It would have been easy to say sorry. You know, what does sorry mean? It's a word, isn't it? But surely it's much more powerful to me to actually say, you know what, this is what I've learnt from this. Because at the end of the day, you grow by learning.
But are you deeply sorry, without having to say I'm sorry, which can be glib and throwaway? But are you in your heart sorry about it all?
And are you acknowledging the hurt you've done?
I acknowledge the hurt, and I wish I hadn't done it. I wish that we could have had the relationship before that we've now got, where we can talk openly about things and we could discuss things, so it wouldn't have happened at all. And everything happens for a reason.
Well, that's interesting. And listen, I want to thank you both for being so open with us this morning, and thank you all here in the school hall. But particularly, just right at the end there, you were very, very honest with us, very candid. And the phone's ringing. People all over the country are saying how candid you were. Thanks, Chris and Doug, everyone. Thank you very much indeed. So, Sonia, reaction at home?
Yeah, obviously.
Is that your sound effect there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's come to me because we've been getting so many calls, texts and emails here. Really interesting story with the couple because Alan from Liverpool, I guess you would agree with what they're doing because you say only the victim can forgive. Another one, forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself. Hatred is re-victimising yourself over and over again. All sins can be forgiven, but they must be punished, says Glyn. And Jason, the question should revolve around remorse. I'm more likely to forgive a remorseful murderer, says Jason, than a burglar who couldn't care less about what they've just done. Now, the numbers are on the screen, so you can start telling us. We're ready to get into our next debate. Whether you think God can take a joke. Get emailing, texting or calling straight away.
Well, has God a sense of humour? Are religious people unable to take a joke? Let's talk about that in the time left to us. Reverend Joanna Jepson, does God... I mean, what's God's sense of humour? Is he Marx Brothers? Is he Laurel and Hardy? Is he slapstick? Is he wordplay? Is he Woody Allen? Is he Jim Davidson? What is he?
Probably all of the above. I think God can definitely take a joke, and you know, I think it's really important in culture, in religion, that we're robust enough to be able to laugh at ourselves, to be able to have a community where we can, you know, take the mick out of each other. I grew up in a family where we'd make each other cry with laughter.
It's a gift from God,
at our
humour.
impressions. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, a lot of people don't associate Muslims with humour. Some people think that a lot of Muslims are very mirthless. Yeah. But Jeff, you're a Muslim stand-up comedian. I saw a cartoon in Private Eye recently. Yeah. Two women in full niqabs, but one had bigger eye slots, and the one with the smaller eye slots was saying to the one with the bigger eye slots, "Pussy." Is that acceptable?
Yeah, that's a funny gag. I mean, a lot of people got this stereotype about Muslims that they don't laugh and we sort of live this boring, morose lives. Yeah. But I mean, I'm being booked by, you know, I mean, I got a call yesterday for a Ramadan, you know, fast break, iftari we call it. Yeah. After that, my stand-up comedy routine. And so, I mean, that wouldn't be happening if Muslims didn't have a sense of humour. I mean, for example, you talked about the family earlier on. I remember when we had the Rushdie affair in the late 80s.
Yeah.
I've never forgotten my father, what he went through, because on the one hand, he didn't want to read the book because he didn't want to be offended, but he's got an MA in English, and he wanted to read the book. But on the other hand, he didn't want Rushdie to get the royalties, so what did he do? He photocopied it.
Okay.
It cost him £200, and that was his way of dealing with it. And I talk about things like that on stage, I mean, Muslims do find things funny. I mean, we've got to get away from this, maybe, 20 years ago or whatever, but I'm just getting people all the time. Muslims are kind of, they're more cooler than you think they are.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose in the army, when you're there in the theatre, in the heat of battle and danger, you need a sense of humour, Tim.
You do, and it is humour that holds soldiers together during very difficult times, and I think clearly God has a sense of humour. I think he's probably looking down, smiling. We take ourselves far too seriously, generally speaking. Even in serious debates, we can take ourselves far too seriously. And I think God has a terrific sense of humour, and humour is what you said. It's a great gift, and if we don't use it, and we don't use it sensibly and wisely, then we don't get the best of it. Having said that, there can, of course, be those who take this political correctness nonsense far too far. And somebody who tries to crack a joke, losing jobs and all the rest of it we read about, is complete nonsense. I mean, people need to be able to...
But jokes can go too far as well, can't they, Jeff?
Yeah, they can do. I mean, just going back to what Tim was saying about the army, I mean, a gag about that is, what have the Taliban and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club got in common? They both lured thousands of people to stadiums and tortured them. I mean, that is something that perhaps the army could use out of that gag.
You're getting closer and closer to the line here. It's quite good news we're off the air in a minute.
No, but I mean, it's important. You see, comedy is a great release.
Peter Hitchens.
Well, I've got no sense of humour at all, so I wouldn't know. But you have to be careful. Laughter is not about people being happy. Laughter is about groups feeling a sense of togetherness. Laughter is often about saying something very nasty in a way that you can get away with. And there are some jokes which I think can be extremely wounding and hurtful, and you should be very careful of them. It's all very well making jokes about your own religion. Making jokes about somebody else's is a different thing altogether.
But the culture that's going on here is, this politically correct culture is nurturing a society in which we're all treading on eggshells, tiptoeing around each other, not, too afraid to actually...
But we can't say anything goes, can we? Because you get the excesses of, Bernard Manning, don't you?
What it exposes is actually that we don't really care about each other. So we've got to make people say the right things and not say the wrong things, because it exposes actually the fact that we're a society that's pretty broken and disparate and fragmented.
OK, well, I'm sorry, on that, at the end, extraordinarily interesting thing. We're going to have to leave it. Thank you all very much indeed for your contributions on the way through. And I'm sure that people at home will be saying stuff about that.
Yeah, there's been quite a few, again, coming through saying that God does and should have a sense of humour. But my favourite one, I have to mention this one, Nikki, is of course God has a sense of humour. This has come in via text. He gave us George W. Bush, didn't he? Don't forget, you can email us with your comments on this week's show and any ideas that you want us to debate in the future weeks, bbc.co.uk/The Big Questions.
And next week we'll be in Brighton asking whether the worldwide Anglican Church should split over the blessing of same-sex partnerships. We'll be asking whether you should dress for God or is it OK to display yourself